IS3s. We've not had a huge amount of time together over the last few weeks, obviously. See, sometimes when you're reading through notes, sometimes it's not the same as reading through it, as someone maybe just chatting through it for you. So I'm going to do a quick chat through the notes for this week. Assembly and finishing, we have seen this before, so it's kind of going over some of the stuff that we've got and getting you prepared to be able to answer the questions you'll find as we move forward to National 5. Okay, let me just get rid of that little thing there. So again, we're going to look at some of the names of the tools, the reasons for doing stuff, checking for glues and stuff, and also a bit of finishing in there as well. So when we do this, when we clamp, one of the first things we do is we always do it without any glue. Now remember that, I've always had you do that. Okay, and the reason we do it is to check to make sure that everything fits together for a start, before you start gluing it, and make sure that everything's sort of going to be exactly where you want it. So if we had a mortise and tenon joint, if you hadn't cut the mortise deep enough and the tenon was sticking out and you glued it, that's it, it would look rubbish, you'd have this big gap. So we do it to make sure everything fits together, and also to make sure that everything's going to be able to go together at 90 degrees. We can adjust it to make sure all the angles, so if it's a box we're doing, we're making sure the angles are at the correct angle. So to do that, we use the number of different clamps, and we've got the ones here. Now, we don't see much of the quick release in the classroom because we don't have that many of them. But effectively, the two handles here, you would use it to squeeze together a couple of pieces of material here, and then it will kind of grip it with the force that you apply to it, or whatever is on the ratchet here, and then you release it with a little handle here. So these are less adjustable, say, than the G clamp and the F clamp. So these ones here, this is what you're likely to use if you are doing something small around the bench, or if you are getting a bit of material and you're maybe on the pillar drill and you need to secure it so it doesn't move when you're drilling it. This would be used, or this would be used round about there as well. So even if you're cutting or sawing on the desk, you can use it to hold the material in place while we're working. If I'm using the electric router, I'm holding the material in place with the clamps, so I don't have to have my hands on it at the same time when it's moving around. The band clamp that you see here is not something we've seen before, and this is not the image I would use of it because this is a metal one. I would be using a cloth one. I'll show you images of that when we get back in. This is for odd shapes. Okay, I know this is round, but it's for odd shapes, and I'll explain that when we get back to school. The one that we've used the most is probably the sash clamp, and the sash clamp works by adjusting the distance between these two parts here. So in the G clamp and the F clamp, you can see here they're adjusted up and down on this lever here. One's by a screw and one just slides along. This one here slides along and you lock it in place using the pin here, and this end here moves in and out, and it uses a screw thread here to actually move it in and out. I tend to have this part here closer to the end here and adjust more with this one here. Okay, so do we need to do, what's the difference between cramp and clamp? I'm not so sure that we really need to go into the details of that. The SQ will accept cramp for everything. So we clamp everything up before we glue it. We dry clamp it to make sure that everything, the corners at 90 degrees, we measure the diagonals from corner to corner to check that. So that's one way. We use a tri-square to check for squareness. And then we adjust by loosening and tightening the different angles of the clamps to actually get this to fit. And usually this is because our joints maybe aren't quite so good. We haven't made anything like a box for a wee while, but we did do this way back in, I think in second year, when we made a little tea caddy. Okay, cupping. This is when the clamps are over tightened, making the wood lift. So again, when you are applying your clamps here, we have to think about how we're actually going to do it. So if I've got quite a large object, I'll maybe have 2 or 3 different clamps going across the material. And again, the same if we are twisting. Okay, so check that the parts are assembled correctly, they're aligned the way they should do, and once you've dry clamped it, then I would just disassemble it small piece at a time, glue it up and glue it back together at the same time. Don't, at the end of the period, I wouldn't sort of dry clamp it and then just go straight into glue in the next period. I would put it back together again so you know where everything's going. And we've done that, okay? It's something that we've practiced. Along with gluing, we can also strengthen up some of our wood joints with screws, nails and pins. Okay, so if we're using a butt joint, butt joint is probably the weakest of the joints, so to make it stronger I could use some panel pins, or I could use some screws. And the different screws we see here, we've got different head types. So we've got here, this is a slotted countersink, we've got a round head here, and this is a posi drive screw by the looks of it. So we get round heads, we get countersinks. That's the sort of things we'll talk about. This little nail here, this is a wire nail, because I can see these little bits here, these little round bits, that stops that nail coming out very easily. So nails can be quite effective as well. When we use the screws, the different shape of the screw comes into effect, and I think most of the time we've used a screw in our projects, we've used a countersink screw. So this is the method. If you think about this, these are two pieces of material, two pieces of wood here that we've got, the pink bits, and we want to join these two pieces together. What we do is we drill a pilot hole first, and our pilot hole, we go all the way from the top here all the way down to the bottom down here, through into both pieces of material. Then I'm going to drill what's called a clearance hole, which is a little bit bigger. See the distance there? That there is a little bit bigger than this distance here, and it's also a little bit bigger than what the actual thread of the screw is. So in theory the screw will drop down into that, and it's only actually going to be threading into this part here. The last bit is the shape of it with the angle. This is our countersink, and this is to allow the head of the screw to sit just below the surface of the wood, and that's A, because it makes it look nicer, and B, for safety, so you don't catch anything on top of it. So as the screw goes into it, you can see here the screw sits nicely into that shape there. It passes through the clearance hole, but it grips into the pilot hole, so the pilot hole must be smaller than the actual screw itself. And normally when we're talking about screws, we talk about M numbers, M4, M5, M6, all relating to the diameter of the screw, and that would work in millimeters. And of course we have the length of the screw to think about as well. If we're going to be nailing, then we're going to use a hammer. And this one here, you can see this one is a cross peen hammer because of the shape of the end here. If this end was rounded, it would be the ball peen. Now the one thing about the nails is I'd use nails and glue at the same time. Okay, so nails are often, they're the bigger and the stronger ones, things like pallets and stuff like that. Pins are more for like securing the bases and the backs of drawers and stuff underneath. So we've tended to use panel pins mostly. These are the very small nails which are difficult to actually get in sometimes. But you can get them up to about 20 millimeters, but they're very, very fine, and you would put them in place. You don't pre-drill with these at all. You'd only really pre-drill with screws. Nails, again, we wouldn't pre-drill, and you haven't really done a massive amount with the nails as such. Our last little bit in terms of sort of fitting is our knockdown fittings, and these are to make things easier to go together. So in your kitchen, in your bedroom, your chest of drawers, your bookcases, things like this, we use fittings like this. So they don't want you gluing wood joints up at home. They want a nice simple method where you put two things together, and in this instance one part would have this one part would have this. We put the two pieces together, we twist this, and it locks into place, so it's almost like it's a mechanical fixing. Okay, so it's much easier for you at home to do. They'll give you a wee tool to do this, and you don't need any skill to really do it as well. So they might give you a little packet of glue, and the glue is just there to help a little bit with holding it together along the seams, but most of the joints are done like this. And it also means we can take it apart and move it to a different room or a different house if we're moving house. We can take it apart and rebuild it. That's what's good about these as well. So these are knockdown fittings. Okay. So that's just a little bit there about various, about the knockdown fittings themselves, and generally which brand is known for their use of knockdown fittings in flat pack furniture. Now flat pack furniture is when you go, you buy something, it's not made up, it's not assembled, it comes in something that you can put into the back of your car quite easily. Okay, so that's what flat pack furniture is, and they take it home and assemble it at home. Now the reason for doing that is transporting. It's easier for us to be able to transport. We've got less space required to do it. So this is for the manufacturer, I should say this. This is for the manufacturer. They can transport more of them in their big lorries because they're all flat, don't take up as much space. They also don't need to pay somebody to build it for you, so they can reduce the cost of the actual product itself. Sustainability due to reduced transport, yeah, because look, we are reducing things like emissions. the use of fossil fuels to transport stuff back and forward, so that is good for the environment in a way. For us as people who buy it, that's us, the consumer, then our benefit is that sometimes you get this sense of, yes, I've done it, I've made it, I've done it myself. I don't know if that's a selling point for some people. Reduced end costs, so yeah, we get our parts a lot cheaper, so the likes of IKEA can sell the stuff a lot cheaper than anybody else. And then off the shelf furniture, it's easier to get home, so you can just go along to IKEA, pick your stuff, find it in the warehouse, put it in the car, away you go, and you can build it up. So that's one of the biggest advantages for us, is being able to get it home and not having to wait on deliveries coming. Our last wee thing today is to do with wood preparation and finishing. So when we've done most of our projects, I'm not always that keen to get things like stains and oils out, because they're kind of messy and stuff. I don't mind getting the varnish out, and the wax as well offers quite a good finish. Now the reason we try and finish stuff is to increase things, something like the lifespan of the product, making it more hard wearing so it doesn't get damaged as easy, protect it from accidental damage, and sometimes if we're using stuff outdoors, protect it from the weather as well. So remember, when we sand everything down, our first thing is to remove all our pencil marks. Then we would use a rough sandpaper, okay, so something like an 80, okay, and then we go all the way down and work ourselves down. So we kind of go from 80 to 120, and you can go finer than that as well. So remove the pencil marks, sand it, and then the other thing that we'll do is actually raise the grain. So we always sand in the direction of the grain, so never go against the grain because you create scratches. Start with the coarse stuff and then move to the finer stuff. Raise the grain by lightly dampening the wood surface. You aren't very good at lightly doing it, but lightly dampening the wood surface. Allow it to dry and then sand it again, and we can repeat that process a couple of times, and that helps when it comes to actually varnishing, because we don't have the little grains standing up when they get wet. So to finish them off, we've used varnish, so you get gloss and you get matte finish. We've used wax, so that's the white stuff, but it can also be coloured, so you rub that on. So this one's with a brush normally, this one here wax with a cloth. Oil, well, it's a bit like the oil you get in your house, so for some circumstances, for a cutting board we would use a natural mineral oil, so it's like an oil in the house. Again, the oil can come different colours as well, and again I could apply that with a cloth or a brush. A stain is something that's like a dye. Think about it like a dye. It will change the colour of the wood to make it look different. Again, we can apply that with a brush. Painting, well, we'll know what painting's about, so we paint pine and we paint our man-made boards, but never painting things like oak or mahogany or expensive hardwoods, because that defeats the purpose of the nice finish on them. And the last one's what's called a lacquer. Now this generally would be sprayed on, so this is like a high gloss finish on it to protect it as well. So it's a bit like what you get on the outside of your car as such. So again, we've got a few here. So there's our stain going on. You see how it changes the colour of the wood. Oil we'd use in maybe a kitchen environment. Paint for our man-made boards, and a lacquer here would be what gives the material here its nice shiny effect. Not this bit down here, just this bit here. Last wee bit, so a veneer is a thin sheet of softwood or a hardwood that we actually place over some really rough wood, and it's to make it look more expensive or better quality finish. Okay, so a very, very thin piece. So the wood underneath, it's usually plywood it's applied to. The plywood is generally fairly rough, coarse offcuts of wood or end cuts of wood joined together, and the veneer goes over the top to make it appear like one solid piece of wood. Okay, so you can get a rather large sheet of it, and it's usually, it can make it look more expensive. A laminate is what's on the desk when we're in the classroom. So on our MDF we use a thin sheet of plastic on top of the MDF to actually make it hardware and make it more expensive, easier to clean. So things like the MDF with the laminate on it, you'll see that often in desks, kitchen worktops and stuff. Okay. That pretty much covers everything in terms of the lesson type stuff. Again, you can listen to this or you can just read through it and then answer the questions and do the worksheet from there. So if I have a very, very quick look here at our challenge. So our challenge is again to go into the house, We want us to go and have a look and see if we can find the veneer or the laminate finish. So this would be like a laminate. This is probably not a veneer on it, but it might be, because look at the different materials of wood in here. So you're looking for something more wooden, something that's maybe got a painted finish, anything which has been assembled using screws, or knockdown fittings. You can do that as well. Oh, there's a knockdown one there, and then maybe a varnish finished as well. Again, presentation, you can use your photographs to do it, just with a couple of notes on it, just to say what's what. Sketches probably won't work with this one. Even a quick video. I hear some of the other kids are using video, that would work as well. Okay, so once you've done that, you've got a worksheet here to go through as well. So do the worksheet first. Again, just type into the boxes there. I'll be able to pick that up. There's not a lot to write in there when you look at it, so that's less than a period's worth of work. And there's a wee quiz which we'll give you at the end of that as well. Okay, so good luck with that, and we'll be back in touch later in the week.